Hey, I'm Adam Foyt from runZero, and I'm excited to tell you about the features in our new 5.0 release. Now, this release comes hot on the heels of our 4.9 release, which came out just a little over a month ago. And if you remember, that release was all about shattering the segmentation illusion and included features like discovering OT and IoT assets that are normally hidden, including those hidden behind gateways that don't have IP addresses, identifying the exposures on those normally hidden assets, and then showing you the path of least resistance an attacker can take to get to those assets using our new attack path mapping feature. Now, this release focuses on empowering defenders to win by default, even in the AI attack era, and has features to help you and your team focus on the exposures that matter most, makes it easier for you to measure the impact of your exposure management program, and allowing you to share the results from runZero with all the stakeholders in your organization. Let's start with the new exposure management dashboard inside of runZero. This is the new default dashboard moving forward in 5.0, and it's really meant to focus you and your team on the exposures that matter most and help you answer the question, what do I need to do next inside of runZero? So we put a lot of key metrics up here at the top, front and center, including your number of active rapid responses. If you remember, those are the really timely threats, like 0 days, where runZero deploys a curated query to your environment so you can see what devices are impacted by that rapid response without having to manually run a bunch of queries and knowing what to look for. And we can see in this particular example, I have 0 active responses, which is good. I've also got exploitable vulnerabilities. So instead of a big laundry list of CVEs or assets, now I can look and see exactly which vulnerabilities are exploitable in my environment. These are the ones that are kind of active. And then you can see the plus 68 next to them means that I've got 68 more exploitable vulnerabilities since my last scan. So this is a great way to help you track of whether or not things are getting better or worse in this particular category. Again, I could drill right into that to get a list of what those exploitable vulnerabilities are by asset. I've got my end-of-life assets. These are those older operating systems or legacy assets that either need to be patched, upgraded, or deprecated. I've got my public-facing assets. These are the assets that are reachable through the external internet, so always something you want to keep an eye on. Your risky OT and IoT assets. This is something that is a result of the features released in 4.9 to help you uncover those IoT and OT assets, even the ones that are hidden behind gateways that don't have IP addresses. And then I've got my multi-homed assets. These are assets with multiple network interface cards on them, and it's definitely something you want to keep an eye on because they can circumnavigate your segmentation strategy and help promote lateral movement inside your environment through the attackers. And again, I've got 35 more of these since my last scan. Again, I can drill right into these and start getting a list of what those multi-homed assets are. And then if I wanted to, I could start to use my attack path mapping to see how an attacker would get to these assets via that attack path mapping feature that came out in 4.9. There's a few other key pieces of information here that I want to draw your attention to. We're not going to go through every single widget in the dashboard, but just a few other key things I want to call your attention to are the goals overview. So now you can set goals in runZero and track your progress towards those goals. For instance, if I want to set a goal that says I want to patch or deprecate all those end-of-life assets, this will tell me what percentage I am towards that goal based on my last scan. And if you scroll down here a little bit further, I've got open vulnerabilities by risk, so I can kind of track how many open vulnerabilities are out there for my critical, high, or medium risk categories. I've got reopened issues by risk in the last 30 days. One of the new features that we'll have here in 5.0 that we'll get to in a minute is the remediation tracking, which is the ability to push vulnerabilities out to a ticketing system for remediation and then to audit and track where we are in that remediation process. One of the great features that we built into 5.0 is that even if an issue is remediated and that ticket is closed, runZero will track that. But if we find the same vulnerability on the same asset, we will just reopen that issue. And so you can think of this as kind of the water your team has had to carry twice in order to solve vulnerabilities. We'll dive into that a little bit more in detail later. Another key metric here is the mean time to remediate issues by risk. So this is kind of allowing you and your team to report on how long these vulnerabilities are open, how long it takes you to shut those vulnerabilities down by risk category. So these are all great ways to measure not just what you need to do next, but how your progress for your exposure management program is coming along. So before we leave the exposure management dashboard, let's take a look at one of the other powerful new features in 5.0, and that is the ability to push this data out as an external scheduled report. So I can share this with anybody, either inside my organization or outside my organization, somebody that has access to runZero or somebody that doesn't have access to the runZero platform, just by clicking this share button up here in the top right corner. I'll just leave the default name. I'll put in the recipients that I want, and I'll just use my external Gmail address here. And then you select your frequency. Either I want this report scheduled out daily, weekly, or monthly to send out on that particular schedule. And then I can just send out that report. But it doesn't just have to be the dashboards. Really, anything here in your inventory tab, like your assets, services, software, vulnerabilities, certificates, all of that information can be sent out as an interactive external scheduled report. So let's just say here that one of my favorite queries is, again, I want to look at all of those active and multi-homed assets. These are assets that I've discovered in my inventory that are out there right now that have multiple network interfaces on them that can really circumnavigate my segmentation strategy and lead to lateral movement across the environment. So let's say I want to push this out to somebody external to my organization. Maybe it's an MSP or somebody that I outsource some of my desktop support to. So again, I just hit share results, give it a name, select my recipient, and then set the frequency. And then you always want to include the additional asset, service, and vulnerability details. This just makes the exported report much richer in data and helps make it more interactive. So you send that report, and this to give you an idea of what that looks like. If I click over here, you click this report, and then it pops up with that query. Now let's say that I want, as the recipient of this, I want to kind of further narrow down what these searches are. Like, let's say that I'm only interested in devices that are desktops. So maybe I'm going to forget about the servers for now, and I'm only going to tackle the multi-home desktops first. Now I've got this external report. Now I'm not in runZero. I'm really just looking at that external facing report. I don't have to have access into runZero in order to type in searches that help me refine what it is I'm looking for. So if I run that query, now I'm looking at just the multi-home desktops that are out there that I really want to take a look at. So these external reports are a great way to put all of the powerful data in runZero into the hands of the people that can use it the most, even if they don't have access into that runZero platform. Now that we've looked at the external shareable reports, let's take a look at one of the other new features in 5.0. So let's do that by going over here to the vulnerabilities section under our inventory and doing a mouse hover over any of these vulnerability groups. Now in 5.0, we've broadened our vulnerability detection. We've expanded our end-of-life coverage for most common network devices and added some out-of-band testing that identifies blind vulnerability classes without necessarily requiring customer-side callback infrastructure. Now this information is consolidated into a summary view and accessible as you do a mouse hover over any one of these groups. Now I want to call your attention to some of the information in here. You'll notice that it tells me that I've got 3 known vulnerabilities in this vulnerability group. It gives me a recommendation for action. So right there it says upgrade OpenBSD, OpenSSH from 9.6 to 10.1 or later. And then it tells me the affected host. And if you see down there at the bottom, it shows me all the CVEs related to this vulnerability group, which means that if I remediate this, I can impact multiple CVEs of different risk classes. So this is a great way to kind of consolidate and present information to you all in a summary view. I don't have to click through many different screens in order to see this. It's all given to me in this scrollable view, this roll-up summary, which allows me to take decisive action and to rapidly decide if I want to tackle this now or if it can hold till something later. And speaking of vulnerabilities, that brings me to the last but definitely not least feature in the runZero 5.0 release. This is a feature that's often been requested by both customers and partners, and that is the ability to push these issues out into an external ticketing system like Jira or ServiceNow for remediation, and to have the ability to audit where in the remediation process that issue is inside of the runZero platform without ever having to leave the runZero platform. So let me show you how to do that. You want to go down here to your issues section in the left navigation menu. I'm going to select this remote code execution vulnerability. You can see that I've got a description of what this issue is, recommended remediation action here. It also tells me what the risk category is, the state that it's in. I can select a date for remediation. This is the target date that I would like the remediation the issue resolved by. And then you just select your external ticket system. So here at runZero, we use Jira. And at the time of launch, Jira is the only external ticketing system we're supporting, but very soon we'll add support for ServiceNow as an external ticketing system, with more systems coming soon. One thing that you always want to click is this attach snapshot to ticket. This takes a lot of the pertinent information like the host name of the assets that this vulnerability was found on, the IP address, just a lot of really important information that will help the person on the other side looking at that ticket remediate that issue as soon as they can. So you always want to include that attached snapshot to ticket, and then you just create your external ticket by clicking this button, and we'll go ahead and push that out to your external ticketing system. Now, the other powerful part of this feature is runZero provides you an audit trail of where in the remediation process this is. So in this particular case, I can see that this issue was originally created 13 days ago. Then it was pushed into Jira. I can see kind of when it was picked up in Jira and moved from inbound to triage. And then I can see where somebody in Jira moved it to remediated. And then down here at the very bottom, the thing that I want to call your attention to is runZero verifies that 32 out of 32 vulnerabilities have been remediated. So this is runZero verifying that every single asset that this vulnerability was found on was actually remediated. Now that's not just that the ticket was closed inside of Jira or ServiceNow or any other ticketing system that you guys are using. It's really runZero going back and doing at the time of another scan, verifying that the assets that were originally attached to that vulnerability did in fact get remediated. So it's not just, you don't have to take that ticket being closed at face value that the root vulnerability was actually addressed. runZero is actually going and looking for you to verify that not just the ticket was closed, but the issue was actually remediated on every single one of those assets. And remember, if you think back to the new exposure management dashboard, runZero is tracking whether or not that those issues were refound, meaning let's say that the ticket was moved to closed, right? And the runZero does another scan and detects the same vulnerability on the same asset that was marked closed inside the issue. runZero will actually automatically detect that and then generate an email for you saying, oh, I refound this vulnerability on an asset that was marked closed. In fact, let me show you an example of what that looks like right here. So here's an example of that email where runZero shows you that a resolved issue has reoccurred on an asset and gives you what that issue is and allows you to verify that the root cause was addressed or not addressed. This really helps go that extra mile, that last mile in the remediation process to make sure that vulnerabilities aren't being lost in the cracks as they move from runZero platform to some other external platform. runZero is always keeping track for you whether or not these issues were fixed in a permanent sense or if the vulnerability for whatever reason wasn't addressed or resurfaced on a device. This is all tracked down here in the reopened issues tab of the new exposure management dashboard. And like I said before, you can think of that as kind of like the water that your remediation team is having to carry twice by attacking these issues multiple times. All right, that brings us to the end of the new features review for runZero 5.0. Thank you for watching this, and we'll see you next time.